Chapter 1. It had been hours driving back to San Francisco from Colorado. He didn't know why he didn't fly and why he needed to drive. But of course he did know. There were no flights through this snowstorm. He had to see a girl he had just met in one of his college classes, and he thought he was in love, and he couldn't wait until she returned from her vacation with her friends. "If you want to see me again, I'm staying at this lodge," she had said, walking out early of the large lecture room, her long blonde hair flowing casually down her back, her tight jeans fitting in all the right places. As she passed his seat, she discreetly handed him a note with her name and her telephone number on it and the location of the lodge she was staying in, Summit County. Traveling back to San Francisco, he didn't expect it to get dark as early as it had. He didn't think about much, not since he met Elizabeth. His head was in the clouds after she kissed him, and his eyes had blinders on where only she mattered. Thinking of nothing but her pretty face, he climbed into his SUV and drove into a blinding snowstorm. When he had time to think, he knew he must have been a fool to travel there alone and then drive back. But he was young and foolish and in love, and he had to get back to San Francisco to see about his ailing father. As he passed a sign on the winding road, it read, "Watch out for deer. Watch out for landslides." Holding tight on the wheel, driving slow and blinking his eyes, trying to see through the windshield because of the accumulation of snow covering his windows, he managed to see the signs just as he reached them and passed them. He wiped his brow from nervousness, and when his hand dropped to the steering wheel, he leaned forward trying to make out what was standing in the road. When he put on his brakes, the car slid, and with a loud bang it hit something. Not used to driving because he didn't need to, he made one mistake and went on to make a series of mistakes. Whatever hit the Range Rover, it felt as if someone dropped a large sack of sand on it, and its front end buckled. The SUV came to a stop. He turned off the ignition. He couldn't see what was lying across the road. It looked like a large animal in the front of his car. It didn't appear to be an elk. He knew what a deer looked like. There were no large antlers on this animal. Stepping out into the snow, it reached high above his ankles. He looked around, and there were no lights except for the ones coming from his car lamps. Walking around to the front, he saw what appeared to be a large dog. He wondered where it could have come from, and then through the trees there appeared lights from a farm. Taking a deep breath, he knew what he had to do. He had to get the animal out of the way. When it fell, it straddled the middle of the road. The snow appeared waist deep on the left side. Where the animal lay, it seemed the only way he could pass without risking snow getting under the carriage or getting the SUV stuck. He didn't know much about a Range Rover, other than it was good in the snow. But snow as deep as this, he thought there was no way he would try to drive around or through it. He would stay on the road. Looking at the animal, he studied how he could lift the dog and bring him to his car. It was so large. It appeared the size of a bear. He didn't know there were dogs or wolves that size. But in a forest there could be anything. This was the animal's home, and he was just another man invading territory where he didn't belong. Reaching down, he took a large breath and grabbed the dog by his shoulders, dragging him to the right of the road. When he had him out of his path, he noticed that the large dog was still breathing. He ran back to the car to get a blanket. Opening the hatch, he took out a blanket and rushed back to lay it across the animal. As he was bending to cover its head, the dog opened his mouth, and as Harper blinked, the dog with the snap of his jaws bit down on Harper's shoulder. Quick, he pulled back in surprise and fright. He turned and started running to the car. That animal had taken a piece out of his hooded parka, piercing his skin. "Oh shit. What the fuck?" Harper shouted and rushed for the handle on the door. Nervous, he pulled at the handle, opening the door, and then jumped inside the SUV. He had to get to the hospital. Harper started the SUV and took off. When he looked back, all he saw was the blanket. The dog had disappeared. Driving 30 miles to the next town, the first thing he saw was a sign to a hospital. Getting off at the first exit, he drove to the emergency entrance, and he jolted out of the car, running and holding his shoulder. A young intern caught him as he barreled through the doors with blood oozing from his shoulder. "You need attention. What happened to you?" "I was bit by a large dog," Harper said, breathless, pulling off his coat. The intern cut off Harper's shirt to examine his wounds. "This doesn't look like a dog bite. You were bit by a wolf." "But this doesn't Look like any wound a wolf would make. The fangs appears too large. You need medical attention now. And I need you to stay here for a week to study you. I can't do that. You will need to stay until you've taken these shots. If you miss one, I can't be certain what will happen. Do you want to risk dying? No, of course not. Now that he found the love of his life, he didn't want to. Then do as I say and stay put. Everything else can wait. If he died without having children, it would be the end of the Samsa line. Robert Samsa, his father, was an only child, and his mother Charlotte was an only child, and Harper was an only child. He wanted to live long enough to have many children, and he saw that happening with the girl he drove through blinding snow and treacherous roads to be with. After placing him into a room, the intern brought in a doctor to examine him. They both agreed that it had been a wolf bite. None they had seen before. Something as big as a bear. Maybe an old wolf was one thought, but the marks on Harper's shoulders proved that it could have been something younger. Before dozing off to sleep, Harper thought about Elizabeth and how much he wanted her to be his bride. His entire final year in college had been devoted to talking to her over the phone and seeing her occasionally in school. She always had a reason why he couldn't see her or take her out on a date. She was the one who had been busy, and even if he had, he would have made time for her. The date at the ski lodge in Colorado would have been his only chance to get to know her before they graduated, and that's why he made that insane journey. One date with Elizabeth was all he had since he met her, and she had brought along a girlfriend, and he was eager for more. But it was enough for Harper. He wanted to spend his life with Elizabeth. Just the thought of her gave him chills with anticipation of the next time. But when he arrived there, he received a call from Michael telling him that he needed to get back to San Francisco soon because his father had fallen deathly ill. When he arrived at the lodge, he settled into his room and called Elizabeth, but she had been on the slopes. When she returned to the lodge, she freshened up, spoke with friends, and then called him in his room. Harper, this is Elizabeth. He sat up in the bed. When can I see you? I drove. You drove through a storm? She laughed. You must really like me or you're insane. But of course I love you, and yes, I'm insane in love with you. I can't stop thinking about you. I've been telling you this from the day I met you. Meet me in the lobby in 15 minutes. I need time to relax first, Elizabeth said. Waiting around and pacing the length of the oversized room, Harper watched at the clock. It didn't look like it would change. 15 minutes was a long time, he thought. He watched outdoors as the heavy snow fell and blanketed the area. He thought of his sick father, and thought of how selfish he had been to leave him. His father said he understood how a young man feels when he's in love, but Harper wondered if his father truly understood the desires and needs of a young man. Watching out the window and waiting for Elizabeth, he had time to watch at some of the skiers hopping off the lift, and noticing some who took the ski lifts to start their ascent. Harper remembered why he never learned to ski. The first time his father took him to the slopes, he broke his leg, and his father wouldn't bring him again. Robert Samsa said when Harper begged him, I'm not going to risk the life of my only son. And that was that, and he never took him again. Harper felt he had been too protective. Watching at the clock, it finally showed 15 minutes had passed. It was time, and Harper strolled out of his room and bounded down the stairs to see Elizabeth sitting near a fireplace with the sound of crackling wood. It was so romantic, he thought. He stood looking at her. He had been nervous before, but nothing like this. It was as if she was a queen and he didn't know whether to kiss her hand or curtsy. She was a beauty, and his mother would have given her approval, he thought. Elizabeth smiled at Harper. I'm hungry. I made reservations for us. But of course she did. He had too much respect for her to have dinner in his room and then expect to make love to her. But that's what he wanted to do. It had been a year since he had known her, and 6 months from their last kiss. He reached for her hand and she placed it in his. The heat of emotion at just touching her hand overcame him. She felt his hand tremble as he led her to the dining room. They were shown their table near another fire, but with a view of the mountain range filled with snow. When they sat, he took her hand and they traded glances. Her eyes large and blue, her lashes thick. Do you ski? Elizabeth asked. No. I'm afraid not. Harper couldn't take his eyes off of Elizabeth. Her hair, a beautiful silky blonde. Her face pale. But her lips were the center of this Beautiful canvas. They were naturally pink and full. And he couldn't wait to kiss them again. He hoped it wouldn't be 6 more months because he couldn't stand it. The desire for sex had built within him to a climax and he needed relief. Mr. Samsa. Mr. Samsa. It's time for your shots, a nurse said, waking him from his thoughts. How many do I have to take? 3 doses. 7 days after the first dose and then 14 to 21. After dose 1. The doctor walked in with the intern, the same one who cleaned his wounds. I'm Dr. Collins. I can't stay here 21 days, my father is ill, Harper said, his voice low. I'm aware of that. I just wanted to emphasize what I said before, that what has happened to you is serious and the pathologist can't tell if you were bit by a wolf or something else. What could it have been? It looked like a dog, but it was enormous, Harper said, hoping for an answer. We really don't know what it is. However, we've had bites like that before. Hunters have discovered deer with the same kind of bite marks, and a few hunters reported being bitten by a large dog or wolf. What happened to them? They died. The doctor looked to the intern with urgency in his eyes. You have to take care of that wound. It was as if the doctor and the intern shared some kind of secret. Therefore it's important that you take your doses. As stated, Dr. Collins said, his voice filled with alarm. Harper's eyes wavered to the doctor. A grim look crossed his face and he looked down. Then the intern looked to the doctor. I didn't want to be the one to tell you, but when I called your father to tell him where you were and what had happened, his lawyer said he had died of a heart attack hours earlier. Harper didn't hear anything because of the ringing in his ears, and his light headiness and the emptiness in his heart. He sat up in the hospital bed and stared into nothingness. The agony of remembering his father, and thinking of his selfishness of leaving a dying father to be with a girl he thought he was in love with, pained him. The expression on his face changed, his eyes and mouth flowed downward into a curve. Tears pooled into Harper's deep blue eyes and they deepened with profound sadness. His father, Robert Samsa, had died early, only in his 60s. Chapter 2. She had been sick the entire trip back to San Francisco. It's nothing to worry about. There's no need to call the Coast Guard. Our ship's doctor can help her. Just go to your cabin and I'll send the doctor, the captain said, reassuring Robert. He had no reason to doubt him. The captain had seen many cases like this in his 60-some years of experience operating a large cruise ship. Placing his hand on Robert's shoulder, he said, Don't worry, Mr. Samsa, help your wife back to her cabin and the doctor will be there soon. And Robert assisted his pregnant wife to her quarters from the dining room. That's what the ship's captain and medic had said the day Charlotte Samsa became extremely sick, as she suffered through a high fever and then went into labor. The doctor comforted Robert by saying, I've seen many cases like this. She's young and she'll get over what's ailing her. She's just seasick. Robert Samsa arranged for a trip to Mexico to make up for the many nights he left her alone to see to his business ventures, and to make up for the honeymoon they never had because he had been busy and forgot about his anniversary. It was too late the next day and the next when he finally returned to his pregnant wife with flowers, candy, and a diamond necklace. Charlotte glanced at it, kissed him, and said, When will I get to wear this? And he showed her 2 tickets in a stateroom on a luxury liner. But I'm pregnant now. His eyes flashed and an equally large smile opened to reveal his beautiful teeth. He picked her up and danced around the floor with her. It's a boy, she said. I want you to name him. Robert had never been that happy in his entire life, and he would never be as sad as he would be when she died. He had taken Charlotte from her family and brought her to San Francisco because of what he thought would be the chance of a lifetime. She eagerly agreed to follow him at the appeal of her father's warning against the marriage. She left her family in the east to follow her brash, handsome husband to the west. When Robert Samsa set foot in San Francisco, he knew this was the place to make his fortune and to raise a family. But his dreams were dashed when his wife became ill on the last journey of their trip and died during childbirth. Instead of feeling sorry for himself, he took the baby and settled into his large mansion he had just purchased for Charlotte in Nob Hill. He hired a woman who had lost her child at the same time to take care of his baby. He named the baby Harper after his father. Robert Samsa had become one of the richest men in the Bay Area, And after many years of hard work he felt lonely, but the only bright light he had was son Harper. Without the only woman he ever loved, Robert Samsa died of a broken heart at the age of 61, and his son Harper Samsa became the youngest and richest man in San Francisco. Harper Samsa inherited property that his father had killed himself to possess. He left it to a son who didn't care for the riches it brought him, and he knew little about his vast holdings he just inherited. At the insistence of Michael, his father's lawyer, he stopped in at his office to sign papers and discuss the future of the company which held the Samsa name. Harper, I need you to look over this property in Nevada. You said you wanted to sell most of it. Well, you have to decide if that's what you want to do. Your father said you should consider keeping this land for a hunting lodge or a vacation home. I don't have time. Besides, I have a birthday party I have to attend tonight. I'm planning on asking Elizabeth to marry me, Harper said, picking up the pen and signing the papers. You really should read this. Why should I? Don't you know how to read? Harper said with a chuckle, handing over the pen to Michael and pushing the 5-page document in front of him. This property has streams and lakes. It's worth a fortune, or will be one day. Harper looked aimlessly around the room, following the latest football games and commentary on 2 flat-screen televisions. You need to pay attention, Harper. He raised a thick eyebrow to Michael. The lawyer had a map laid out on Harper's desk and pointed to the land circled on the map. Water is essential when you need to build a town. Who the fuck said I'm building a town? I'm going to get married. That's all I'm going to do for the next few months. I'm going to lay with my wife on a beach somewhere. I'm not bringing Elizabeth to a fucking log cabin in the middle of the woods. With your money, it doesn't need to be a fucking log cabin. Well, for Elizabeth, anything where there are wild animals and away from the city is a cabin in the woods. Harper stood. I have to get ready for Elizabeth's party. She doesn't know the meaning of money. She's spending it on all kinds of things, and you've given her so many expensive gifts that you will be broke before she says yes, if she ever does. You know there are richer men than you, and she's dangling them in front of you, and you're taking the bait. Harper sat back in the leather chair and ignored Michael. Did you at least have sex with her? Harper turned to him with a deep look in his eyes and his thick eyebrows in a V. Harper put his hand to his chin. You know, if you weren't my father's closest friend, He stopped short of firing him because he needed him. He had been the next thing to a father to Harper. Fuck you, Michael. I love you too, Michael said. He hid a closed smile and shook his head. You know you look good behind my desk. I'll let you stay there and run my father's company while I take a long honeymoon. Elizabeth wants to go to Italy. It's your company now, asshole. You have to be around to make sure it's still solvent for your children. If it was up to you, I wouldn't have any children. Besides, I don't want this company with its responsibilities and wealth, Harper said, raising his voice. Everyone needs money. Your children will need the money, and their children. Your mother and father took this journey not for themselves, but for the generations to come. Don't throw it away. It will be like your father dying for nothing. And you never know, you might want to run from that money grubbing fiancé of yours. You know you take too many liberties with me. One day. Harper didn't complete his thought. He just pointed his finger at Michael and walked to the door with a grin and opened it and closed it behind him. Strutting outside, Harper glanced up at all the high-rise buildings with the Samsa name stamped on them. Then he climbed into his limo and said, "Take me home." On his way, he thought about what Michael had said about the property in Nevada. Then he thought about his last conversation with his father. Why do you keep going like this, father? You never take a rest. Buying more property than you or I need. And why didn't you marry again? Because I will never find anyone like your mother, Robert had said. You've never looked for anyone. You had plenty of chances. They wanted my money, and that's all. All the women whom I found to be attractive were interested in only one thing. They didn't want a man with a child. They wouldn't have been a mother to you. Another reason I didn't marry. He paused, staring at a picture in a silver frame. Because once you find the woman who will make you happy, no one will ever take her place. When the car slowed to a stop, the driver had parked in front of his father's mansion. He stepped out and walked inside. I have to sell this monstrosity, he thought. Elizabeth will want something more modern. And he smiled at the thought of her. She had been the most beautiful girl in his college class. She moved around as if walking on air, he remembered, with a multitude of equally handsome men following behind her only looking for a smile, or so he thought. It was love at first sight. He fell in love that day she strutted past him on her way to class. His class. When he picked up Elizabeth's picture lying on the large piano, he watched at it, wondering when she would give him the go to have sex with her. "We can't have sex until we're married," she had said to him the first time he took her out on a date, and the second time he said he wanted to marry her. He thought he had found the woman his father said would be special and fill his life. She had high morals and he liked that about her. But each time they met and he picked her up for a date, she would unzip his pants and fondle his penis, and she would drop her tongue down his throat in the most obscene way. He wanted to fuck her, but after getting him aroused she would push him away. He didn't know how long he could stand this. She would keep him so worked up where he couldn't think straight. All he thought about was putting his sheath into her. He couldn't get near her without his cock twitching. He had to have her, but she kept him to his promise of no sex until marriage. And that's why he had to ask her to marry him and put him out of his misery. It had been one long year of abstinence. He thought he would burst from the anticipation. Remembering Elizabeth, he strode to the fireplace and reached for a picture of his mother and father. There was never a picture of him being held by his mother, or the kind of pictures where you see the entire family, because there wasn't a family anymore. Feeling empty, he murmured, "I want a family. I want lots of babies." He shrugged and placed the picture of Elizabeth near the picture of his mother and father. After having his dinner alone and taking his bath, he reached for his tux, which had been laid out for him. When he had dressed and was fidgeting with his bow tie, he remembered another conversation with his father. Harper appeared to appreciate his words since he had died, and he missed him even more. "Times are different, and this world is different. And you are different from me. Any woman who marries you will inherit a fortune. They will indeed be hanging on to you. Make sure you select one with care," Robert had said to Harper. He looked forward to seeing friends from college, since Elizabeth had decided to invite the ones who had excelled in their fields. He wondered if they would recognize him, although he thought he hadn't changed. After making a final loop on his tie, he glanced into the mirror. He was the mirror image of his father, but younger. His father had dark curly hair and brilliant blue eyes with long silky lashes. He pulled a picture from his dresser and placed it near his face. "The same face," he murmured. The picture showed a playful father holding on to his mother and smiling broadly. Robert's face no different than Harper's. The only difference is that Harper was clean-shaven, but they had the same piercing blue eyes and square jaw. Robert, a fit man who hadn't been born rich. In the picture he filled out every inch of the suit when he was younger. "I worked in a mill and lift tree trunks all day, even cut a few down every month. Kept me in shape," Robert had said to Harper proudly. "I'm sorry, son, but all you're going to be lifting is a pin. I guess I did you an injustice," he remembered his father saying to him. As Harper entered his limo to take him to the party at Elizabeth's family's home, Emily rushed to Elizabeth's mansion and entered the servants' quarters, late to dress Elizabeth and serve Elizabeth's guest. Chapter 3. Emily had been held in class late because her English professor called her into his office and said she is in jeopardy of losing her scholarship. She had a small scholarship for track and field. The professor said, "I know your circumstances, Emily, but perhaps you should think about a different job or leave that job because it's taking up most of your time and you've missed most of my lectures. I can pass the final, but there's no way I can give this job up," Emily said to her professor. That job came with free room and board, and where could she find anything comparable to this which would allow her to go to school? She had moved out of the miserable apartment she shared with an alcoholic father. This was the only job she could get. She had no skills, but she got a maid's job serving food or drinks. "You're late," the butler said with a coarse, grumpy voice. She tried explaining, but he put his hand up, which meant, "I don't want to hear it. There's nothing more important than preparing for this party. You know how important it is for Elizabeth to have everything perfect. She's expecting to become engaged to Mr. Samsa, and she doesn't want anything to spoil it. What do you want me to do?" "You need to go up and help dress Miss Elizabeth. She likes you and wants your opinion on what dress she should wear. Then bring yourself back because you're serving drinks tonight. One of the boys called in sick. I thought you didn't want women serving? This is an emergency. You know my thoughts on that. As long as you behave yourself and not make a date with any of Elizabeth's guests, you won't have a problem with me. Can I go now? Emily's voice low and her face didn't betray her. She couldn't stand one more day of being made to feel like a second-class citizen. She knew her status and she had been poor all her life, but she had gone to college. Very soon if she could make it through this night, she would be able to get her a job and leave these people behind who looked down on her as if she asked them for something. She worked hard in this house and never had a friend or boyfriend since high school call on her. Emily trod up the stairs taking her time. When she reached the second floor, she made a left turn and knocked on the door. Come in. When Elizabeth saw Emily, she dropped her towel and she stood naked in front of her. Emily turned away in embarrassment. Elizabeth pranced around as if she thought her body was exceptional. She did have a large pert bosom and she wanted Emily to marvel and compliment her on it, but Emily appeared too shy to even look at her, so she picked up a robe and placed it over her and tied the belt. What the hell took you so long, Emily? I wanted your opinion on these dresses. She pointed to the bed and Emily turned to see the most beautiful, expensive dresses in her life. Walking to the bed, Emily picked up one and passed her hand over it. Yes, it's silk and it cost a fortune. I'll give it to you after I've worn it few times. But heaven knows where you'll wear it, Elizabeth said before. Emily could tell her she had no place to wear something that expensive. Elizabeth knew when she offered to give the dresses to Emily it was an empty gesture. I think that one would look great on you. It goes with your fair skin and blonde hair, Emily said. You know we could be sisters if your eyes were blue like mine. Too bad you have green eyes. Men like true blondes, not strawberry blondes, she said to Emily, who stood looking at her as she dropped her robe and pranced around, naked in high heels before deciding to put on a pair of panties. I guess you would know, Emily said, helping her pull up the dress and then zip it. Of course you haven't had the experience with men as I have. You're a virgin. And men say they like virgins but they really don't. Elizabeth's voice snarky, her tone condescending. I thought you said that you've never had sex with Mr. Harper. I haven't, but that doesn't mean that I've never had sex, silly. You can have plenty of sex and never have them penetrate you. But I guess you don't know about such things. I guess your father prevented any boys from coming around. That's why you left. You wanted to have a man fuck you, Elizabeth said, watching at Emily. Emily's cheeks turned rose-colored. Her eyes fell downward with embarrassment. Yes, I'm right. You want to fuck. Now you've told on yourself. If I were you, I wouldn't wait. It's better to have a man break your hymen before you're married than to have to deal with that on your wedding night. It's so messy. Elizabeth went on as if she was a teacher and she had been teaching a child to read. So you've prepared yourself for Mr. Harper. Don't you think he deserves something better? Elizabeth stopped and turned and looked at Emily with a raised eyebrow and a smirk and a frown on her face. No man deserves better than a good fuck when he gets married, and that's what Harper has been begging for. And he will get it after he buys me a mansion and the biggest diamond my friends have ever seen. And Elizabeth turned around, smiling, and said, How do I look? Beautiful. That's all she wanted from Emily. To tell her she looked beautiful, and to confirm that she was more attractive than Emily, who had staggering beauty in her own way. Emily stood 5'6" and shapely with a small waist and round hips. If she had the money and clothing Elizabeth had for packaging and presentation, there wouldn't be half the difference in Elizabeth and Emily. Because Emily has qualities Elizabeth didn't have. She was humble, she had courage, and she was a real person. Emily felt she had to be in love with the man she married. Emily had to feel something for the man she fell in love with. She wanted to be excited when he walked into the room. She wanted to look at him and have him arouse her with one look. She wanted to marry once and stay with him all her days and then some. Not leave like her mother left her father the minute times got hard. Chapter 6. When Emily opened her eyes, Elizabeth had been standing over her for a few minutes, watching rudely as Emily slept. Elizabeth, with her hands on her hips, tapped her feet impatiently. My family is firing you today. I thought I'd tell you and save them the embarrassment of having to dismiss you. They seem to think you threw yourself at Harper and maybe fucked him, which is why he broke our engagement. Elizabeth turned, pacing the length of the room and gazing at us surprised. Emily. Emily had worked into the early hours helping to clean up after the guest had gone, and she was a little groggy and tried to say the least. Wiping the sleep from her eyes, her brain finally connected with Elizabeth's words. She narrowed her eyes and said, "Why would your family think I would have sex with your fiancé? Emily would never do such a thing. She never had a boyfriend, and she couldn't understand why they would come to that conclusion. Because I told them you did. I saw how you were looking at him. I saw the look in his eyes when he met you. You knew I wasn't having sex with Harper, and you took that as an opportunity to fuck him. You know that's not true. When have I had time? I need this job. Why are you doing this? I'm not here to discuss how or when you made time to fuck him. I just feel you did." Elizabeth opened the drawer and threw Emily's few pieces of clothing on the bed. "A lot of people need things. I need Harper back. But until he comes back, you are fired. Get out today. I want you out of here in 15 minutes, she yelled, her voice shrill and loud. The staff in the kitchen heard her. She wanted them to hear her throw Emily out. "I don't have any money," Emily protested. "Can I at least stay on for another week until I find something?" Emily sat up. "Until I find some place to stay." She didn't want to go to her father and ask to stay in his room. She had taken her last money to pay his rent and buy him food, and now she was homeless. "That's not my problem. I said you have to leave today." And Elizabeth turned and walked out of the room, closing the door with a bang. Emily sat up straight and put her feet down and stepped onto the wood floor. In a daze, she walked into the shower and stayed there for 10 minutes. She had 5 minutes left. She dried herself and her hair and stuffed her few things into a cloth satchel, and in 5 minutes she passed through the servants' quarters, hungry and confused, with them looking at her and never offering her anything to eat. An elderly man bent over, who had been a manservant since the family came to Nob Hill, touched her shoulder. When she turned around, he gave her $100. She looked up at him with gratitude, and he said, "I don't need it. Get yourself breakfast and leave San Francisco as soon as you can." Elizabeth is not a nice person. I've known her since she was a child. She took the money only because she would have hurt his feelings if she had given it back. Emily stood outside waiting for what she didn't know. The fog had settled last night, and it wouldn't leave until midday. She trudged up the hill, thinking about how she would finish college and have someplace to sleep. She had no plans except to make it to her evening classes. She didn't have a job, so now she didn't have the problem of not completing her classwork. She would go to the library before and after class to study. Still, she hadn't solved the problem of a place to live. She thought about a friend of hers from class. When she came up with this last-minute idea, she had walked miles and was standing waiting for a cable car. Hopping on with her cloth bag in her hand and a few dollars in her pocket, she paid for the ride. Looking down, she reached for a paper and looked through the wanted ads. That was the easiest way to get a job. When she glanced up, she was at her stop. She climbed out and walked down the street and looked for a 3-story house. When she found it, she walked up the stairs and rang the bell. She rang it again. On the 3rd ring, she heard yelling, "Hold your horses. Hold your fucking horses. Who the fuck is ringing my bell? You had better be a good-looking bitch, or you aren't getting in here." He pulled the curtain aside which hung on the door. When he saw Emily, he said, "Oh, you." Opening the door, "Come in. I knew I shouldn't have said if you need a place to crash, come here. But then I talk too much and my heart is too soft. Should have known better by looking at you that you would be fucking crashing at my place one day. Come in. You are welcome here. If I seem a little grumpy, I haven't had my coffee." Emily followed Stanley into the living room. It looked like an old parlor, filled with antique furniture and Tiffany-style lamps. He rented to young men and women who went to the local college. "Stanley, I don't have a place to stay," Emily said with tears pooling in her eyes. "I came to that conclusion the minute I saw you standing at my door this hour in the morning. I haven't had my coffee yet, and I have a class at 9. He sat down. "Don't stand there. Sit and tell me all about it." Then Stanley stood and waved for Emily to follow him. They ended up in the kitchen. Stanley brewed 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. "Now what happened?" They sat at the table and Emily told him about last night and Elizabeth. I checked the newspapers and there's a position as a maid. You are better than that. That's all I can get that offers room and board. Stanley thought about. Emily, I can keep you one night maybe two, but this place is full already. You can sleep in my day bed in my room. That is until my significant other decides he will visit me, which may be at any time. Thanks, but I'm going on the interview today. If not, I have to go with plan B. Stanley raised an eyebrow. Knowing Emily, there wasn't a plan A or B. She never did anything but work and go to school. She had no life. Can I use your phone? Stanley shook his head yes and pointed to the phone. She stayed on it for a few minutes and then turned with a wide smile. I have an interview in an hour. The person I talked to said they needed someone desperately. Like today. Emily gave out a sigh of relief. Where and with whom? You know you have to be careful. You are a pretty young girl and there are perverts lurking out there. It's at a mansion on Nob Hill. They are the worst. I mean, you have real scumbags looking to take advantage of a woman, especially a small broke girl like yourself. They get you into that place and tell you they want you to be their maid, but what they really want is someone they can have when they want to visit your room late at night when the missus isn't around. I think you're being too dramatic. You must be preparing for a part in one of Shakespeare's plays. Who is it this time? Iago in Othello. I thought so. Don't say any more. You make me frightened to go outside these days with your gloom and doom, Emily said. Where is your room, because I need to freshen up. Come on, follow me. As Emily combed her hair to go on her interview, Harper was sitting in his home office with his lawyer. Chapter 7. Harper, you made the wrong decision when you broke your engagement to Elizabeth. Now it's all in the papers and the gossip mongers are having a field day. It was in the morning papers you refused to marry her. Her family mentioned drugs. You know she has grounds to sue you for alienation of affection. Michael threw the morning papers to him. If the news got out this soon, it's because she made the announcement and not me, and she wanted this, Harper said, sitting back in his leather chair. He dropped the paper on the table in front of his chair. Her father has a wide reach in this town, and you don't want to get on his bad side. He's the one in debt, and he was using Elizabeth to get to my money. She didn't love me. Is that what I have to deal with? Women who only want my money and can't see the person inside me. Harper placed his hand under his chin and his eyes fell to the floor. He appeared to be heavy in thought. How do you know she only wants your money? Michael said, leaning over to pour Harper a drink. He waved his hand over it, signaling he had enough. I was standing on that terrace. You know, the one that wraps around that house, and I heard her tell her father she wanted to marry someone else. Not me. She took me for a fool, and I guess I have been. I wouldn't have sex because I thought she was saving herself for our wedding night. Now that was a joke on me. You said the terrace, Michael said, not hearing half of what Harper had said to him. If I remember that terrace you're talking about, it's so far from that room it would be impossible to hear anything, especially if it's filled with people. Harper turned and looked at Michael. That's what I needed to talk to you about. You didn't ask me how I happen to be naked in the middle of San Francisco. I thought if you wanted me to know, you would have said something, Michael said with his hand steeple in front of his mouth. I'm going to tell you now, Harper said. There was short silence. I'm a werewolf. This time a long loud silence. Get the fuck out of here, Harper, Michael said in disbelief, his voice raising higher than usual. You've had too much to smoke or drink, or you're on drugs. I don't take drugs and I rarely drink. Really. I'm a werewolf. Harper's voice deepened with intensity. And how did you come to that brilliant conclusion? Harper, I know losing your father has been difficult, and being raised without a mother has its problems, but this is just plain crazy. I think you should see a psychiatrist. Michael reached for a pen and notepad from his coat pocket and scribbled a name of a doctor and his phone number, and then he handed it to Harper. Harper just looked at it and then at him and said, I couldn't be more serious. A knock came to the door. The door opened. Sir, you have a young woman here. She answered the ad I put in the paper. I've interviewed several women so far, and it's time to make a decision. Remember the maid who had been with your father retired, and with this large house we need one more maid and someone younger to walk up those damn stairs. I'm Busse. You hire her. Harper raised his hand to dismiss him. You make that decision, Harper said, turning back to Michael. I have something very important to discuss with Michael. Please don't disturb me again. Very well. And he backed out and closed the door behind him. Where was I? Harper looked to Michael. You were saying something about being a werewolf, Michael said with a casual tone, scratching his forehead. And he turned his head, put his hand over his mouth to laugh. I didn't tell you this so you could snicker at me. I've had a hard night. Boo. You know how difficult it is to discover that you're some kind of animal and then have to tell a friend and he doesn't believe you. It's not that I don't believe you, I just don't think it is possible. Harper stood. He dropped his neck to the right and you could hear bones crack. And in a matter of seconds he had shifted to a large white wolf standing on all fours, and then he turned back. Michael's eyes grew large and he jolted from his chair. He didn't know at that moment whether to pray or run. Do you believe me now? Holy shit. You can't tell anyone about this, Michael said, turning his head, looking around as if he thought someone was in the room. I wasn't planning on telling anyone, only you. I just needed someone to believe me. Does Elizabeth know about you? Of course not. Then maybe she'll take you back. I don't want her. I don't want anyone. I can't expect any woman to want me and care for me after this. Don't tell her. Just go about your life, and when you've been with her long enough she'll accept you if she loves you. That's your answer? She doesn't love me. Have you been listening? She wants money, not me. No woman will want what I've become. Then you find another woman and pay her off, give her enough money, and have her sign a non-disclosure. I'll write it up for you. I can't lie to a woman about something like this. And you can't tell the truth either. You will be alone all your life, and you're just 24. Harper stood and paced around the room. Michael glanced at him. You're making me nervous. If I make you nervous, can you imagine what I will do to some unsuspecting woman who I happen to dupe into marrying me? You're handsome, young, and rich. It won't take long to find the right woman. I'm no good at choosing women. Well, then let me make the choice. Go see that property in Nevada and then tell me what you think. When you come back, I'll have several women lined up and ready to marry you. You'll have to tell the one you choose about me being a werewolf. Yeah, right. That'll go over well. I tell you what, I'll just say that this will be a marriage of convenience. How does that sound? I want a family and I don't care how I get it and with whom, Harper said. I'll take that drink now. Michael poured him a glass. Harper wasn't a drinker, and that appeared to have changed as well. As he sat back, a knock came to the door. Come in. You don't have to knock. It's my duty. Please, Mr. Samsa. Let me carry out my duties around here. I've been with you, taking care of you since you were a child. I'm a man now, Harper said, his voice strong but patient. I came to inform you that I decided to hire the younger woman. We need some young blood in here besides you. She starts this evening. And the elderly man turned and left the room. Good. I can start by interviewing your new maid. Do you want to see what she looks like? I don't care about looks anymore. All I want is someone who will accept me. And when she discovers that I'm a werewolf, she won't go screaming into the night. I think I can guarantee that, Michael said. He probably could guarantee she wouldn't go screaming into the night, because there was no way he would reveal to her that Harper was a werewolf. It was an insane notion. And no one would believe it even if he said so. He can hardly believe it himself. That's great. Do what you need to do. I may move to Nevada. There's plenty of forest and land there. I'll probably build a home. He glanced at Michael. Did I tell you I eat my meat raw now? I hunt it and kill it, Harper said, glancing out the window, his mind far from San Francisco. I need you to take care of my holdings, Michael. Once you have found the woman who will agree to become my bride and have my children, then if she wants to get out of the marriage, she can. The only stipulation is I want my children if she decides she can't accept me. This was the first time Michael heard about children. Getting the woman to marry him is easy, but the part about children, now that was a horse of another color. One thing at a time, Michael thought. You talk as if you're a hideous creature. There are 3 phases to me. The one you see now has this insatiable appetite for sex, especially during the full moon. And the one you saw where I'm a large wolf. Then there is the second phase where I stand like a man, but I have this large muzzle and these deadly teeth. All you have to do is control that part when you are with your mate. See, I'm Getting with this werewolf thing, Michael said, smiling and proud of himself. It isn't as simple as you make it out to be. I have to learn how to control all phases of my wolf, especially the urge to have sex every minute of the day. Not with all women, I hope? No. I'm searching for a mate. If I smell her, then I'll know. But so far, there's been only one woman I've had that sensation with. So why didn't you contact her? I don't know where she is, and I don't have time now to find her yet. Remember, I have to go to Nevada. If you haven't come up with a suitable woman, then I'll be forced to look for her. When Harper flew out to Nevada, Michael requested for Emily to come to his office for an interview. Chapter 8. Have a seat. Emily is your name? Yes, Emily Mason. But I don't see why I should have a second interview when I'm hired and working already. It's not that kind of interview. Emily's legs began to shake. It was a nervous tic, like biting her nails when she felt uncomfortable. You're interviewing for a chance to marry your employer. What? Why would I consider marrying my employer, and why would I want to marry an old man? Do you know who you're working for? Not really. I've been working for a day and I haven't seen anyone but the butler. He said that Mr. Robert Samsa owned the house. Then you don't know Mr. Samsa? I think I served him at a mansion where I previously worked. But his name is Harper Samsa and he's 21 or 22 years old. The butler is not completely correct. It is Robert Samsa's home, but he's dead. And now it belongs to Harper Samsa, and he's the one you are interviewing for a chance to marry him. For a chance to marry him? You make it sound like a game show. This is ridiculous. It is ridiculous, isn't it? As you can see, I'm not laughing. Michael sat with a stone face. He had been very serious about finding Harper a wife. He had interviewed 10 women in the course of one day, and none were as naive and uninformed about the world as Emily. She is perfect, he thought. The others were savvy and ready to sign on the dotted line. They would say anything and do anything to marry Harper. He never disclosed to them who the rich man was, but nonetheless they hesitated at the idea of having children, and that was foremost on Michael's mind when he stared at Emily. Harper had said he wanted children from the marriage. You're a beautiful girl. I'm sure you could have any man you want, and you probably have a few boyfriends. No, I don't have a boyfriend. I've never had any. I have a father who never let me date, and now I have too much responsibilities to date anyone or marry. There is the matter of completing my college education and taking care of my father. If you enter into this agreement with Mr. Samsa, Emily interrupted. Michael, why would he want to marry me? I thought he would marry Elizabeth. Isn't she more in his class? There are no class systems in America. Tell that to my father. And look at me. But if you marry him, you will have everything you need. I don't need anything but a job. Don't tell me that if I don't agree to this shit you have on this paper that I will lose my job. No, you won't. Then tell Mr. Samsa that I don't want to marry him. If he wants to marry me, then he should ask me himself, and not send you to do his work. She stood. What kind of man sends his lawyer to interview for a wife? Emily said, annoyed and upset. She walked to the door and then turned. I'm going to work now. When Emily left, Michael called Harper. What do you think about Nevada? Michael said. My father was right. I'm staying. Tomorrow I'm looking at an architect to build my ranch. I can have horses and dogs, and I don't have to worry about anything but finding someone to marry me. I'm content now with who I am. That's why I called. I found someone. But she said if you wanted to marry her, you would have to ask her yourself. When I build this house, then I'll ask her. Don't you need to see a picture of her? Not really. Any woman who demands that a man ask her for her hand in marriage is the woman I want to marry. I don't care what she looks like. If she can take me being a werewolf, I can certainly accept her faults. Well, I didn't exactly tell her about the werewolf thing. A long silence ensued. What exactly did you tell her? That you were rich. One good thing came out of this. She assumed you were an old man, and she told me to get lost. I like a woman with spirit. She appeared pissed over me interviewing her. I think the whole idea that you weren't there turned her off. Did you at least say it was because I was away? That would have brought on more complications, and I didn't want her to ask any more questions. This situation with you being a werewolf and wanting to acknowledge this right away could have ramifications you don't need. What I don't need is starting out a marriage or engagement with someone and then they discover that I'm not what I say I am. I'm no longer a man in a sense. I'm a man but a wolf too. What she sees before her is not what she'll get. I think you're judging yourself too harshly and undercutting yourself. She sees the true you, then she's the right woman for you. But if you show her that animal you showed me, then there is no way you will find the right woman. Thoughts of what a woman would do if she saw the real Harper race through his head, and he only imagined someone running and screaming into the night when he makes love to her. Did she at least have a man before me? Now that's a delicate matter. I don't think this young woman is the type to ask her if she's a virgin, but I think she's a virgin. I don't want a virgin, Harper said, his voice hard and cold. Then you should go back to Elizabeth. Harper didn't answer because he knew Michael was trying his best. Michael, I've decided to move to Nevada and I'm planning on buying extra land. I'm in negotiations now. I'll be back in San Francisco within a week. Find me a woman that's not a virgin. Do I have to spell it out for you? I need someone I can have sex with. I need her pregnant right away. I don't want her to have second thoughts about me. I'll try, Michael said. He sat behind his desk, looked out the window and wondered what to do next. Emily was his last resort and she was perfect for Harper. He knew she would be good for him if he gave her a chance. Anyone else would be disastrous. But Harper appeared inflexible about the woman he would marry. Chapter 9. After Harper met with the landowner to finalize the papers where he would purchase over 100 acres of land near Lake Tahoe, Nevada, he drove around the area to see where he would build his ranch. The house would be backed against a mountain. His bedroom looking out at the snow-covered peaks would give him a sense of security, and he could see the sun rise in the morning and watch at the moon at night. He began to dread the coming of the full moon. No wife and no one to mate with, he thought. What's the fuck wrong with me? I'm behaving like a fucking animal. But I'm not an animal. I have to remember that, he said. I'm a man. Pulling the truck to the side of the road, he stepped out and looked around at the large forest bordering his property. Instinctively he knew he had to keep some of the property as a sort of reserve. Only the land that had been cleared would he build a house on, and a stable for his horses. He walked with a stake in his hand. He plunged it into the ground. Here's where my house will stand. And here's the stables, and over there a hospital, and behind the hospital a place for my wife where she can have flowers, he murmured. Felt good to plan his life. It made him feel like a man with a future. When he turned, after hearing a thrashing sound, he spotted a deer rushing through the pines. A pain hit him, jolting him upright. Then he doubled over with sweat. He wrapped his arms around him, as if he could hold back the changes rushing through his body. When he glanced at his hands and looked at his arms, he had transformed into half man and half wolf. His body altered a little at a time, until he had reached the final phase. He wasn't in control of his body, but he had to get it under control. Realizing what had happened to him, he tried to reverse it back. What the fuck? I have no control over this, he asked himself. But he did. His brain would tell him how to control that body of his, but now his brain was telling him that he was hungry, and no cheeseburger with tomatoes and lettuce would satisfy his hunger. The thought of food sent his body to the final phase of change, and he shifted into his wolf form, and he took off in a quick sprint in the direction of the deer. Running fast and jumping over boulders and high brush, he caught up with the elk, even though it had a head start, with the deer running over 35 miles an hour. But there was something the elk had been afraid of when he passed Harper. Before Harper reached the animal, a black panther leapt from a tree and pounced on the animal and brought it down. The elk lay there kicking and moving its head, but the panther crouched down and tore a large piece of meat from its neck as she scanned the area. The panther sensed Harper, but it didn't stop her from feeding until the animal had no light in its eyes. Harper stopped in his tracks. What the fuck is this? He murmured, his breathing hard and loud from the chase. There are animals like this in my forest, he thought. I can't bring a woman and animals here to be eaten alive by this thing. Then she shifted and stood before Harper naked, her dark hair long and shimmering in the sunlight, her eyes black, her skin olive. She wiped her mouth. Are you going to stand there like you've never seen my kind before? Are you going to help me eat this animal? I hate to let an animal like this go to waste, she said to Harper. He stood with eyes wide and mouth open, and then he shifted and he also stood naked alongside of her. Did you bring clothes? A minute went by and Harper didn't say a word. Do you talk? Are you one of those mutes? When you are bitten they don't tell you what you're going to become. No one tells you. You just find yourself having powers you never thought. She ripped the underside of the elk and shoved it into her mouth. By your expression I can tell this is a first for you. You will have many firsts, so get used to it. I'm full. She patted her flat hard stomach and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. You should eat. She smiled at Harper, showing her sharp incisors, and calling him with her long claws for fingers and nails. Harper walked reluctantly to the dead animal, crouched down and began feeding on the meat the werepanther had ripped apart and offered to share with him. When they had consumed enough, the werepanther stood and he stood. He tried making sense of what he was seeing. Do you want to fuck? She questioned. I like to be penetrated when I have consumed a large meal. It keeps me in shape. She strutted away, showing her curvaceous body. He blinked his eyes, registering what she had just asked him. Because of the intense rush he felt and the lack of sexual intercourse, he thought it was a good idea, but for one thing she didn't arouse his senses and he was looking for a suitable mate and she wasn't one. She wasn't like him and he was looking for someone like him. A were-female or a human. Where is your home? He asked. I don't need to go home to fuck you. We can do it here on the ground or against the tree. Hasn't it dawned on you that we can fuck wherever we want? She turned and bent over, revealing an inviting behind. Harper didn't know what he should do, but he didn't want to let an opportunity go by because he had been without sex and his new body was telling him he needed an orgasm. This was another thing he had to get under control. He couldn't go around fucking every female who desired him. Then he remembered his search for a bride and he didn't want to complicate his life with a were-female. He wanted to bring his bride here, and if he started a relationship with this werepanther, who was unknown to him, it might prove fatal. I'm going to be married soon. I don't want to break my vows to her. What Harper didn't realize, in this world of shifters they made their own laws. Their laws centered on how they felt at the moment. He was still clinging on to the world of men and their civilities. Here, if they wanted to have sex, they found a female if she was willing or not, and they would take what they wanted. And the female shifters were more than willing to have sex with a high-status male, and this male owned the entire county. Harper was the personification of an alpha. If you don't want to fuck me, you will when the moon comes around again. Maybe then I will be busy, she said, throwing her long dark hair to the side. She reached inside her leather pouch and pulled out a black shirt and leotards, and dressed in them. You better get some clothes. Do you have any? I have a change in my truck. Good, because you look like you need a drink. I know just the place. On our drive there, I'll tell you what to expect as a new shifter. I'll give you heads up on what to look for. She strutted to Harper's truck, hopped in, and sat waiting for him to catch up. He appeared dumbstruck by all that was happening to him. Things had been occurring too fast and he couldn't get control over his body. When Harper dressed in a black and green flannel shirt and a pair of worn jeans, he stepped into the truck, looking to the werepanther, who had put a sliver of red lipstick on her mouth and managed to clean up the blood on her face. She said, I carry this at all times. She handed him a moist cloth, leaned over and wiped his face and watched at him. You are handsome. Did anyone ever tell you that? Still not making sense of everything, he didn't answer her. Oh well, when you're ready during the full moon you can drop by. I live about a mile north of your property on the other side of the mountain. I'll be waiting for you, she said, purring. Turning on the ignition, Harper looked to the werepanther and said, What's your name? Angela. What's yours? Harper. Are you the Harper Samsa that everyone is talking about, who bought up all the land in this area? He smiled. I guess I am. I wouldn't admit to that where we're going. We have many shifters who stop in at the bar. That's what you are. You are a shifter. A werewolf, she said, glancing at him to see a raised eyebrow. You may not like it, but you are no longer a man. You're a man, but not in the sense of a man. Have you noticed how large your cock is? She shot him a devilish smile. This bar where we're going is the nearest for miles, and we get humans and shifters coming in. All who go there are cat shifters, a few werewolves not. Many left from what I hear, and a few humans who are living with shifters. You can't tell the shifters from the humans. I mean, the humans can't tell, but the shifters know the humans. You aren't especially liked because the humans in this area and the shifters think you're going to cut down their forest. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make it a haven for shifters. I'm going to build a town where shifters and men are welcome. That may be human of you, but until you do that, don't tell anyone who you are, she said, watching at him as if she could pounce on him and rake her claws down his wide muscular chest. You have to make a right turn off this road. Then you follow the curve and it will take you right up to the rusty nail. Why do they call it that? You don't want. Chapter 10. Turning off the engine, Harper hopped out of the car and rushed to open the door before Angela climbed out. That's another thing you have to remember. Don't be so polite to a female. The alphas around here, whether human or cat or wolf, will take that as a weakness and challenge you. From looking at you, you aren't ready to fight one of these seasoned wolves. And don't challenge a human, they carry guns. Is there anything else I should know? Yes. I belong to Nero. He owns this bar. Harper rushed to open the door to the bar and caught himself. Then he remembered what Angela had said to him. He walked in first and she held the door. He stood looking around. The eyes were on him and he thought it was for obvious reasons. Reasons Angela had gone over with him and reasons she had yet to disclose. She belonged to the notorious shifter who owned the Rusty Nail, and it lived up to its name. It was more like an old barn without the livestock. It was open, with a high ceiling and rafters. Then there were stalls, the kind where they keep horses. When Harper strode in, heads lifted from the stalls. On the floor wood chips and straw. In the middle of the bar, an open arena, not for dancing, but it looked like someone had made a ring, the kind you see where humans fight. The livestock had been replaced with wolf shifters and cat shifters of all kinds. Mountain lions, panthers who were mostly females. It appeared all the female shifters were cats, big ones and little ones, and all the male shifters were wolves. And then there's the men. Harper's first thought was to walk out and leave this gruesome bunch of characters, but this was to be his life, and this area was where he would make his home. Like it or not, he had to make it home and get along with the shifters and humans. Nero glanced up when he saw Angela, and his face fell into a sour look. His ears peaked upward at seeing her. She strolled to the bar where Nero stood, behind the counter, stocking it with recognizable liquor and some homemade brews. Who the fuck is that with you? Nero said, looking at Angela and shooting Harper a menacing glance. This is Harper. He's one of us, Angela added. He's not one of us. Not with a name like that and that simple expression on his face. But we can toughen him up. What do you mean toughen me up? I didn't come here to fight anyone. I came here to bring Angela here. I met her. Angela turned to Harper and narrowed her eyes. Don't say anything more, she whispered, but it wasn't low enough and Nero heard her. She forgot to warn Harper that Nero forbid her from hunting without him, and he banned her from going near anyone when she was in heat. And she was in heat. But Harper didn't know it. His instincts and smell wasn't for felines, but humans, and were females. Walking around the counter and standing in front of Angela, his long arms reached for her hair where he wrapped it around his large fist, and then he dragged her into the stockroom. When Harper made a move to stop him, 3 large werewolves shifted to block his path. They had learned how to shift quickly, which gave them an advantage over Harper. He was still learning. He was learning everything on how to be a werewolf. You had better mind your own business, a large muscular werewolf barked. He appeared to be part of Nero's pack because they sported the same tattoos. A picture of a skull. What does that stand for? Harper questioned, pointing to the skull on the beta's arm. It signals a dying breed. We're the dying wolves, but before the humans wipe us out, we're going to reap such havoc on them and anyone that stands in our way. Do you want to join? I don't believe you can settle anything with violence. The werewolves laughed out loud and moved closer to Harper. He could smell their musk. He could hear their hearts beat. He backed away to the edge of the bar. Sitting on both sides of him were the female cats, who appeared more interested in what they were drinking than a werewolf about to be killed. You haven't understood your reality, have you? You're a werewolf and you shed blood when you hunt animals and eat them. The only difference of what you were and what you are now is you're much stronger and more bloodthirsty, and you fuck a lot. He turned to the members of his pack and laughed. Now all the shifters hiding came out for a laugh. He stopped laughing and his eyes narrowed and he furrowed his bushy brow. This makes you apart from that human you were, the beta said. The beta wolf reached for Harper, grabbed hold of his shirt and tossed him in the air into the ring as if he was a doll. Harper, feeling threatened, shifted into his second stage. He stood like a man, but his body stronger and more powerful. His hands became large paws with long claws, his fangs like blades. His eyes changed from a cool blue to a glowing sharp golden brown. His teeth elongated and his two incisors sharp and deadly. He hadn't wanted this, but he was thrown into this situation and now he had to prove himself in front of these shifters. If he didn't, he would never be able to live in this area, and he would never walk out of this bar alive. There wasn't a doubt that the shifters would kill him eventually or run him out of the area. But where could he go? Back to San Francisco or any large or small town? There was no place for a werewolf. There was no place for him but here. Only in the rural areas could he find peace. But he had to prove that he belonged. When Harper landed on his feet, the large werewolf with the muscle-bound neck and arms which hung to his side like two hammers had jumped in the ring. They were facing each other down. The shifters hiding in stalls having sex with the werewolves came out to see the cage match. No one will leave until one is dead. Harper heard one werewolf whisper to a werebobcat with large breasts. A low groan and snarl crossed the beta wolf's lips, and his wolf was ready to dig into Harper until there was no more Harper. He had the body of a fighter, but he had few scars and bruises anywhere on his body. He had either one without being mauled, or he had never had a fight before. Harper thought. The beta chose him because he wanted to make a name for himself, and what better way to do that than to kill the new wolf in town. Fear wasn't part of Harper's DNA. He had lived and loved clueless. He didn't know he had to fear the beta because he knew he was an alpha in all sense of the word. He knew he could survive anything, and now he would be put to the test. As the two werewolves stood watching and circling each other, the crowd in the Rusty Nail came to the forefront to cheer, shouting out the werewolf's name. Redlin! Redlin! The stomping of feet and the whistling and jeering at Harper didn't faze him. Today he would test his courage and determination. Today he would know if he could be a werewolf or just cease to exist. Today he would know if he is a true werewolf. Redlin made a leapt at Harper, and he raised his large paw and swiped him away like Redlin was a bug. Redlin gave a loud bark. When he turned, Harper's sharp claws had torn a hole from his eye to his neck. Harper stood wishing he wouldn't have to do this again. He wanted this to be over. But Redlin came at Harper again and Harper backed away. Redlin grabbed a hold of Harper's shoulder and Harper heard someone shout, "His jugular! His jugular, Redlin, and it's over." Now Harper knew what he had to protect, and what would bring an end to Redlin's aggression. Harper realized Redlin had been hurt because the blood oozed from his face and shoulder. Redlin kept checking his face. He appeared concerned with the amount of blood covering him. Then Harper poised ready to kill him. He didn't see Harper's eyes turn to a burnished gold. He didn't see that he forced Harper to become a killer. Redlin's breathing became loud and he clenched his teeth and made another leap for Harper. Harper sidestepped him and pivoted and launched himself on Redlin's back and sunk his teeth into his jugular, ripping a large hole on the side of Redlin's neck. Dropping down on the canvas like a boulder in a lake, Redlin lay there flaying around. Harper had never seen anything like it and didn't want to see this again. He climbed out of the ring in silence and covered with blood. Harper staggered through a throng of werewolves and werewolves watching at him, but not saying a word. They appeared stunned. He stumbled into his truck and, staring at nothing, he started the motor and drove away. Nero and Angela had been in the back and hadn't come out for all the shouting. And then the silence. One of the betas knocked on the door to the room they had disappeared into. "What the fuck do you want?" Nero shouted through the moaning and groaning and heavy breathing. "I'm fucking. When I'm finished then I'll be out," he barked through his teeth. Chapter 11. When Harper stumbled out of the Rusty Nail, he was tired and hungry. One more hunt and he would replenish the strength he lost with that fight. He had a kill under his belt and his face showed the horror and satisfaction of it all. Then it came to him that this was no way to live or die. He couldn't kill werewolves. For his knowledge there weren't many he knew of. They continued. With this war against each other there would be none left. There was no going back. From what Harper knew there was no reversing the process. Maybe that was a good thing to rid the world of werewolves if they behaved like animals, Harper thought. It had been a bad thought. Now he had to concentrate on what to do next. He would go back to San Francisco and meet the woman Michael had suggested would be a good fit for him. He knew after his fight and after killing Redlin he had changed in his thinking and with his body. Now he became aware that he had to use his instincts and mind to shift quickly. There were too many natural enemies, especially men and other werewolves that were bent on killing him. But no werewolf should kill another half-human and wolf without it getting to him. This was his species now, and there was no way he would reveal this to his bride. Wow. He began thinking in terms of marrying someone. He had to agree that Michael was right. After driving back to his property and hunting an elk, chasing it down and making the kill, this time Harper thought nothing of the kill. He packed the meat into his truck and stopped at a local store to get ice to keep it from spoiling. He would need fresh red meat until he could get back to the town he had planned to name Samsaville. As he drove to his home, he used that time to map out everything in his mind. A large ranch with enough rooms for his children. But first a bride for a werewolf. He smiled at the thought because it was ironic. Just recently he had asked Elizabeth to marry him. He was a man then, thinking and behaving like a man, young and thinking only one way. Thinking about marriage to a beautiful woman of stature and status in the community. Now that was over and he's a werewolf. Yet his thoughts weren't that much different, but his idea of a wife had changed. Harper's priorities had changed. He needed a woman who would accept him for him. With all his insecurities and the hideous aspect of seeing him for himself, the werewolf he had become, a killer who ate the uncooked flesh of animals. He took a full breath and exhaled. That would be a tall job for any woman. The thought of a school and hospital for shifters crossed his mind. He needed to make this a reality, but if he couldn't find a human to marry him, he would settle for one of the wercats. They appeared more than ready and eager to mate with him. Driving up to the portico and parking under it, he hopped out at 5 o'clock. In the morning, the staff had been up and congregating in the kitchen. When he stood in the doorway with blood on his shirt, they just stared. There is a large deer in my truck. Please have it skinned and cleaned by 11 am. And he turned, but then he swiveled around and said, don't bother to cook the meat. I'm sleeping in until noon. He didn't tell them why he wanted the meat raw, nor did they ask. The staff looked to each other. The one cook, one maid, and one butler never took Harper to be eccentric, but with all his money they suspected that sooner or later he would show some of the tendencies of a spoil-rich kid. When Emily strode out of bed on the first floor, Harper was climbing into his bed. After a bath she zipped up her uniform. Why do I have to wear this? She murmured. There are 3 people in this house. But she knew why. It was to prevent anyone from mistaking her for anything other than what she was, a maid. Strolling into the kitchen to get her orders, she sat at the table and the cook handed her a plate of eggs and bacon and toast. Why do they have me here? There's not that much for me to do. You are young. Seems like not too much work. If you were old you wouldn't ask that question. Today you have to clean Mr. Harper's room, he's back. The butler chimed in. Although she had been excited when the offer of marriage came from his lawyer, she thought it only right that she should refuse. He had just jilted Elizabeth, and who knows what he wanted her for, she thought. After meeting with his lawyer, she didn't put much thought into it. Maybe something was wrong with him. Maybe he didn't have a penis. Maybe he was into deviant sex. Maybe he would tie her up in one of his rooms and wouldn't let her out. Who knows what was wrong with rich handsome men who wanted to marry their maids. Although she thought well of herself, it was still the idea in the back of her mind that something had to be wrong with him. And it was, but she didn't know that, nor did she know what could have him asking his lawyer to find a woman for him. All of this was too suspicious, and she was happy she didn't have to wonder anymore. She would graduate from college and get a job and put this all behind her. Don't you have something to do? The old man said, looking at Emily, who had just finished her breakfast. She didn't say anything. She picked up the items she used to dust with and turned and walked away. It would take her all day because the house was so large. She decided to start with the upstairs and then make his bed when she got around to Harper's room. By then he would be up, she thought. As she moved from one room to the next dusting and changing the covers, she heard a loud moaning and thrashing coming from Harper's room. She tried to ignore it, but the clamor and smashing of glass was disturbing. Emily turned the knob, but the door was locked. When she pivoted to walk away, the door opened slightly. "Who's there?" he murmured. All she saw was a pair of gold-colored eyes in the dark. His face covered with a light beard. He stood naked with a powerful chest broad with muscles. Most of him hid behind the door, but from what she saw of him, there was no man as impressive in stature or devilishly handsome as him. "Harper Samsa. I heard a noise and I thought something was wrong." "You are Mr. Samsa. Who else would be in my room?" His tone strong and commanding. "I've seen you before, but you never looked like this." "It's my beard." "That, and I've never seen you naked before." He glanced down and stepped behind the door, leaving a small gap. "I apologize. It will never happen again." And he closed the door. Emily stood staring at the closed door, not knowing what to make of him. When she had dusted every picture and vase throughout the house, it was 1 o'clock. Rushing to her room by way of the kitchen, she burst through the door. "What do we have for dinner?" Sitting at the table with a large piece of red meat on a plate sat Harper. The cook brought over a plate of salad for her. "It has everything you asked for. You'll like it, dear." Emily looked over at Harper and he got up and walked out without saying anything to her. What's wrong with Mr. Harper? He could be heartbroken over Miss Elizabeth. Ever since he came back from Nevada, he's been acting kind of strange. You mean it isn't natural for him to walk around naked? And to cry out in his sleep? Well, not really crying out, he was groaning and moaning and breaking things. It could be he's upset over his father dying, and then there's Miss Elizabeth, who is just like that, got herself engaged to a friend of his. Men can't handle what women can handle. They go to pieces fast when they have one little problem or when someone disappoints them. Take his father. He never married after the death of his wife. What about Harper? He was too young to remember her. That's why there are no pictures with the family together? He has no family. Only us. He wanted a large family, but when Miss Elizabeth refused to marry him, I think he just fell apart. Emily smiled because she knew the truth. Harper refused to marry her, but she made it seem like she was in love with someone else. And now she is marrying that someone to get back at Harper. Maybe she should take the lawyer up on his proposals. But why should she try to ease his broken heart by sacrificing her own? But Harper is a man she could love. He is so handsome and appeared to be needy. She understood needy. She took care of her father all her life, and now she couldn't. By marrying him, she could help her destitute father. And if the marriage didn't work out, she could leave Harper. But she didn't want to think about that because she couldn't imagine ever leaving him unless he proved to be a horrible man. Emily walked to her room after her talk with the cook. She called the lawyer's number. "This is Emily Mason. I know who you are and where the call is coming from." Well, that is a scary thought. Do you always keep checks on the household staff? Only the ones who are important to Mr. Samsa. I've reconsidered your offer. A long pause. I'm afraid Mr. Samsa isn't interested in you. He's not interested in marrying a virgin. You didn't ask me if I were a virgin. I'm not in the habit of asking something that personal. What made you think I was a virgin? Well, are you or aren't you? Emily didn't want to start off a relationship with a lie, but she thought this could solve her problem with college and with helping her father. She rationalized that she was lying for a good cause. One she will have to deal with in the future. Because after all, what man doesn't want a virgin? I'm not a virgin. You will have to prove it. How am I going to do that? Emily's voice raised to a shrill tone. You will have to see his doctor by the 1st of the month. I will make an appointment for you. My secretary will call you with the time and location. Everything works out, then you will have to come in and sign the papers. Mr. Samsa doesn't know it's you, and I won't tell him until you have been certified not a virgin. I have to go to my classes. I don't have time to discuss it with you any longer. And Emily hung up the phone. She dressed in a pair of jeans and white shirt and threw on a dark leather jacket. It was her mother's old jacket she left when she ran from Emily's father. As she was entering the library, she bumped into Stanley going out. She pulled his arm and said, "I have to talk to you, Stanley. This will have to be good or fast. I have a class in 15 minutes. Come on, sit with me." They found a couch in the back near a large open glass wall. "I have a problem. If it's money, I won't have any until the 1st of the month. I don't need money now. I'm working. What I need is for you to break something for me." He glanced at her curious. "I need you to break." She swallowed hard because she felt sick saying it, and especially to her friend. "I need you to break my hymen," she whispered soft and low. He had to lean in to hear her. "What is that, like a part of you? I've heard of that before. It's not a finger or a leg, which I would never do, but this hymen, what the fuck is that?"